Freedom of speech is under attack, to the peril of our Constitution. Who has read recently about Mr. Fayed, the former late owner of Harrods? Why did you not read a word about him whilst he was still alive in this context? Because we have libel laws and increasing privacy laws that make it harder to reveal things. And yes, the online safety bill has made it possible for Ofcom to have regulations that will curtail our freedom of speech. I went to speak at Bristol University, and there was security and police and all this sort of stuff. And then BUCA, the Bristol University Conservative Association, got a bill for £600. That is not freedom of speech. Freedom of speech has to be free of cost as well as being free in what you say. But I also spoke at Cardiff and had a huge array of Palestinian people protesting against me. They were entitled to do so. They were entitled to be there and say they didn't agree with me. John Locke, good Somerset man, said that you should have freedom of religion, but that didn't allow you to break the law. What he meant by that is if your religion was in favor of human sacrifice, you weren't allowed to have human sacrifice because that broke the law. But you were allowed to believe that human sacrifice was a good thing. But why does freedom of speech matter? Where has it come from? Well, let's go back. The House of Commons, on the 8th of February, 1576, when Sir Peter Wentworth got up to speak. And Sir Peter Wentworth is important because he is the first example of the claim of free speech in Parliament. What did he say? He said, "None is without fault, no, not our gracious Queen." And so horrified were the assembled members of Parliament at that they voted to lock him up in the Tower of London. But freedom of speech is something we have claimed as a right for hundreds of years. We formalize it in a parliamentary sense in 1689 in the Bill of Rights. There is absolute freedom of speech in Parliament, both the Lords and the Commons, and the courts cannot overrule it. And why is this important? Well, freedom of speech is at the heart of our Constitution. There are four great pillars of our Constitution. And what are they? They are freedom of speech, democracy, the rule of law, and rights of property. And if you take one of those pillars away, our Constitution collapses. How do you have democracy without freedom of speech? How do you run an election if we can't print leaflets saying that the other side are a bunch of rotters, or words to that effect? How do you print leaflets saying that the Lib Dems are good, honest people if you don't have freedom of speech? I mean, even with freedom of speech, that's pushing it, but nonetheless. Your democracy cannot take place without freedom of speech. You cannot have an effective election because all you get is the message approved by the government and churned out by the BBC. Wouldn't necessarily be very helpful to us. But why does the rule of law depend on freedom of speech? What do those two have in common? Well, again, the law must be in the open. And we've had increasing instances of private justice where scandals don't get revealed. And what if judges are corrupt? We certainly had corrupt judges in the 16th and 17th century. How did we expose that? Freedom of speech. That if you aren't able to say that the judge is taking a backhander, how do you make sure your judges are honest? Or how do you say that the judge has got it wrong? May I just quote my own father, who breaks a butterfly upon a wheel. That was using free speech to challenge an error by a judge, which the judges have never really liked. And indeed, historically, we had laws against it that made it very hard to criticize judges. So freedom of speech protects the rule of law. What about rights of property? Well, with rights of property, what happens when a socialist government comes along and decides to use a compulsory purchase order, or dare I say a Tory government, because we weren't much better, to take your freeholding. Your little bit of land, the house you've lived in and that your family has lived in for generations. You need to be able to say this is being done because they've got some interest in it, or this is being done and they haven't followed the law properly. Your rights of property depend upon your freedom of speech. What happened when the Sun, that great newspaper that in the 80s and 90s exposed scandal after scandal, revealed the news about Hugh Edwards? The left came out and said it was shameful and he'd done nothing wrong and they were ruining a good man. Freedom of speech is under attack. And what about that great spider at the center of the funding of the Labour Party, my Lord Ali? What is the one thing he's spoken about in the House of Lords? Curtailing freedom of speech and controlling the press. What did that dreadful Leveson report try to do? I was one of 13 MPs who voted against it, 530 in favour. When the House of Commons is united, it is almost invariably wrong. Freedom of speech, just look back over the history. Freedom of speech is under attack. You, ladies and gentlemen, you are the troops who are here to defend it. We are the Conservatives who will defend it. We will defend Angela calling us scum, but we will defend our Constitution. Because without freedom of speech, the other pillars collapse. There is no democracy, no rule of law, no rights of property. And the Labour Party hates freedom of speech because socialism is always exposed by truth.